Well, how about that Jones boy? Holding off both of the Kyles to win the Southern 500. Good for him. We're going to get into all of that, so let's get into it. This is The Fuel. What's happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to today's edition of The Fuel. Coming a little bit later than usual. I've just been really busy. Haven't really had time to do the reviews. But we're going to get into it right now. Today we're going to be reviewing the 2019 Grand Prix of Portland for the IndyCar Series and the 2019 Bojangles Southern 500 for the Cup Series. But before we get into all that, we have a little bit of housekeeping to take care of. So let's get into the news of the week. Alright, so starting out on this edition of News of the Week. Last week, I think it was last week, or the previous episode, I reported that Tyler Dipple had been suspended from NASCAR due to his arrest for criminal possession of a controlled substance. Well, those charges against him have been dropped. So as a result of that, he has been reinstated into NASCAR. So evidently they took a look at it and said, you know what, since the charges against him have been dropped, we can go ahead and bring him back. So he is now back into the NASCAR Truck Series, which is where he made his debut earlier this year at Eldora, if memory serves me correctly. So that's good. Anyways, at least for him. Bit of Xfinity Series news. Denny Hamlin got DQ'd out of the Xfinity Series victory on Saturday night. The car was too low. And as a result, Cole Custer, who finished second, has been elevated to the victory, which I believe is his 6th victory of the year, if memory serves me correctly. So basically right now, this championship looks like it's coming down to a battle between Christopher Bell and Cole Custer. Of course, Cole Custer nearly won the title last year, but got snookered by Tyler Reddick, who now drives for RCR this year, and has 4 wins on the year, and is also a threat for the championship. But yeah, Denny Hamlin is the second driver this year to be DQ'd out of a victory. Earlier this year, Ross Chastain got DQ'd out of a win in the Truck Series, which was, I think, the Iowa race, if memory serves me correctly. So that DQ rule is really coming into effect. It hasn't come into effect in the Cup Series yet, surprisingly enough. In the Xfinity and Truck Series, it definitely has, but we have, to my knowledge, we haven't had any disqualifications in the Cup Series yet. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. A bit of IndyCar news. The 2020 IndyCar Series schedule has been released, and it's kind of underwhelming. They basically took Pocono off the schedule, and they replaced it with Richmond International Raceway. So Richmond returns to the IndyCar schedule. So now we'll have 2 short tracks on the schedule next year, which are kind of similar-ish, except that Iowa is just slightly longer than Richmond. And Iowa is actually a lot bumpier because they haven't, I don't think they've repaved the track since it was built, which they might want to think about doing. Because it's getting to the point where it's going to be time to get that repave. But yeah, pretty much a couple of schedule reworks, like Circuit of the Americas is being moved to the 4th race of the year. But other than that, I mean, the schedule's pretty much the same. Just they swapped out Pocono for Richmond. So very, very underwhelming. I mean, there was a lot of hope that Surfers Paradise would be on the schedule, a race in Mexico would be on the schedule. You know, maybe increase the schedule length to 19 or 20 races for 2020. Nope, it's remaining the same, and that sucks ass. I mean, we need more IndyCar races. Let's be honest. The schedule, I mean, there's too few races in IndyCar right now. I mean, the optimal number would be either 19 or 20 races, and right now there is just too few races in the IndyCar series, and in particular on ovals. And it's like, well, they don't have very good attendance on ovals. Well, what do you call, the attendance at fucking Gateway then? I mean, they pretty much showed you how to promote at an oval. I mean, the demand was so high they had to open up tickets for turn 1. So what does that tell you? And considering how spectacular the finish was for that race, I would imagine that ticket sales for next year are going to be even better, especially considering that they're going to team up with the Truck Series next year and have a kind of a weekend event between the two. So yeah, the 2020 IndyCar schedule, very underwhelming. I'm not impressed at all. But now we get into a bit of sad news. Certainly not what you want to see if you're a race fan of any sort. Going outside of the realm of IndyCar and NASCAR to Formula 2, where this past weekend they were at Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps in Belgium. And during the Formula 2 feature race, there was a very nasty crash, which saw Antoine Hubert, a French driver, a French developmental driver for Renault, tragically pass away. What happened was, it looked like Hubert got loose coming up the hill and spun out, got into the tire barriers, got launched back out into the middle of the track, and basically got T-boned by Juan Correa at very high speed. And he succumbed to his injuries, I think, a little bit later on. Yeah, very, very, very dark moment for Formula 2, to say the least. And he was only 22 years old, and taken from the sport way too soon. Because I believe he had a couple of victories earlier this year in Formula 2. So, very bright up-and-comer. Possibly could have become a potential Formula 1 driver at some point. We'll never know now, unfortunately. And unfortunately, this is just the dark side to motorsports. I mean, it's, in my opinion, one of the greatest sports in the world. But on the flip side, no matter how safe, they make auto racing, it'll never truly be totally safe. And this is, kind of another example of that. And unfortunately, it was just a case of, wrong place, wrong time. It had nothing to do with, flying debris or, improperly secured, barriers or anything like that. It was just wrong place, wrong time. He hit the barrier, it spun back out onto the track, and unfortunately, he got T-boned at high speed. I mean, there's not much you can do about that, unfortunately. I mean, it's bound to happen at some point, and unfortunately, it took the life of a Formula 2 driver. So that sucks, because it's never something that you want to see as a motorsport fan. So Antoine Hubert, may he rest in peace. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the race review, starting with the Grand Prix of Portland. I'm just going to cut right to the chase on this one. The Grand Prix of Portland fucking sucked. It was garbage. I mean, almost nothing happened in this race. I mean, it was boring as fuck. A far cry from what we saw last year. Oh boy. So Colton Herta starts the race from the pole. Then we had some first corner shenanigans that That Festival Chicane, man, it can be a real bitch, and it certainly was again in this race. When Graham Rahal basically tried to ARCA brake it in there and took out both Aero cars, Zach Veach, Connor Daly, Takuma Sato received damage. Simon Pagenaud actually got spun from behind, but I was actually able to get it back going again. So yeah, basically took out 4 cars. I mean, he admitted fault for it though. But yeah, that's basically what that Festival Chicane does. So the first caution on the very first lap for that pileup. Herta leads on the restart on lap 13 after a long cleanup. And then we get our second caution on lap 14 when Ryan Hunter-Reay tried to squeeze his teammate Alexander Rossi down the front stretch. Rossi backed off, but Hunter-Reay braked way too late and got into Jack Harvey in turn 1, basically taking them both out. They were able to get Hunter-Reay's car repaired and back into the race, but he was laps down. Herta leads on the restart. Dixon kept things close with Herta after 25 laps. He started finally challenging Herta for the lead on lap 35, and then took the lead on lap number 37 for our one and only pure lead change of the day. And that's when Herta really started dropping back. I mean, trying to hold Dixon at bay, really used up his tires. Power and Rossi and Rosenqvist got by him. Pagenaud kicks off green flag stops on lap 39. 4 of the top 5 pit on lap 42. Rosenqvist stays out and inherits the lead. Dixon cycles back with the lead, so he's looking really good to get back into this championship fight, when all of a sudden he loses power on the car. From what they said, it sounded like a battery issue on the 9 car. So in back-to-back weeks, Dixon had a punctured radiator at Gateway, and then he has a battery issue at Portland. You know, back-to-back weeks he's had these weird mechanical problems. You know, it's almost like fate is telling him, you're not winning this 6th championship this year. You are not allowed to win back-to-back. So, what looked to be a race where Dixon was going to get back into at least, you know, conversation for the championship, now is a long shot, and it is very doubtful he's going to see that 6th championship this year. So Will Power inherits the race lead. Herta gets back by Newgarden for 4th. After he got fresh tires, Herta started coming back towards the front. Power pits from the lead on lap 74, and then he cycles back around with the lead. Not much happened after that, until the third caution comes out on lap 98 when Santino Ferrucci comes to a stop on the front stretch, and apparently he also had a battery issue. Power leads on the restart with 4 laps to go, and literally nothing happened. Absolutely nothing fucking happened in this race. And Will Power wins the Grand Prix of Portland for his 2nd victory of the year, 2nd in 3 races, and the 37th of his career, which brings him up into a tie for 6th on the all-time list, if memory serves me correctly. Felix Rosenqvist and Alexander Rossi round out the podium, so Rossi gaining a little bit of ground in the championship battle. But yeah, this race sucked ass. I mean, it was definitely one of the worst races of the year. Certainly one of the most boring, I'll tell you that much. Because, I mean, it was 108 lap race, and it sucked ass. Like, literally nothing happened. Alright, so let's take a look at the race results. Okay, as it turned out, it's 105 total laps. So Will Power, of course, wins the race. There were actually 7 total lead changes during the entire day. Only one of them pure, so that kind of tells you what's going on there. Felix Rosenqvist, the highest finishing rookie, Alexander Rossi on the podium, Colton Herta in 4th, Joseph Newgarden in 5th, Spencer Pigot with a 6th place run, Simon Pagenaud, despite getting spun out on the very first lap, came back to finish 7th. Matthias Laced with a top 10. Man, we haven't seen that guy's name anywhere near the front this year, so good job by him to get a top 10 finish for AJ Foyt Racing. Sebastian Bourdais with a 9th place effort. Charlie Kimball, who was only running a part-time schedule this year, he finishes in the 10th position, so good job by him. If I can save the page, I probably have to do a what you can call it. Alright, 1 second here. I thought I freaking saved the point standings. Alright, give me 1 second and I'll bring up the point standings. Alright, so the championship standings with 1 race to go in the IndyCar Series season. Joseph Newgarden leads the way. His gap between himself and Alexander Rossi is 41 points. That is the gap. But of course, the final race of the year is double points. So this lead is not safe by any stretch of the imagination. I think Juan Pablo Montoya had a similar lead a couple years ago and still lost the title to Scott Dixon. So the championship's not over yet by any stretch of the imagination. Simon Pagenaud 42 points back, and Scott Dixon is 85 back. Mathematically, those are the last 4 drivers in the championship hunt. Will Power in 5th. You know, I don't know what it is about Will Power, but once he seems to be out of the championship hunt, all of a sudden he becomes a completely different driver. You know, 2 of the last 3 races he's gone to victory lane. Now Pocono, he kind of got lucky with, you know, the weather coming in, but, you know, this time around he basically just flat out outran everybody. But yeah, Will Power just seems to become a completely different driver late in the season when the championship is not on the line for him. Takuma Sato, you know, despite some of the problems that he's had this year, still 6th in the championship, so that's pretty good. Ryan Hunter-Reay 7th. Ryan Hunter-Reay 7th in the championship? Man, despite all his problems. Felix Rosenquist in 8th, Graham Rahal in 9th, and Santino Ferrucci rounds out the top 10. Of course, he's completed the most laps of the year, so that kind of makes sense. But that's the championship standings for IndyCar as it stands with 1 race to go, Laguna Seca, in 3 weeks. So now let's go ahead and get into the NASCAR review. Alright, so here we go. Your review of the 2019 Bojangles Southern 500 at the legendary Darlington Raceway. Throwback weekend. So pretty much everybody and their mother had alternate paint schemes. Unfortunately, the race was delayed by rain a little bit, so they didn't get started until about 10 p.m. And you might be asking yourself, why would they wait that long to start a race at 10 p.m. on a Sunday? Well, because of Hurricane Dorian, who has been wreaking havoc all up and down the Carolinas this week. So that's one of the reasons why, but pretty much everybody stayed. The grandstands were pretty much filled once they were able to get the race underway. William Byron leads the field to the green. Little thing about William Byron before we get into this. This coming weekend at Indianapolis, he has an opportunity to make history. He has won the pole for every Crown Jewel event this season. Daytona 500, Coke 600, Southern 500, and the 4th Crown Jewel, the Brickyard 400, is to come. And if he's able to win the pole for the Brickyard 400 as well, he will become the first driver ever to win the pole for all 4 Crown Jewels in a season. Damn, that's some pretty crazy history if he's able to pull it off. Brad Keselowski leads lap number 1. Kurt Busch gets by Byron for second, and then Kurt with a great run down the front stretch to get by Keselowski for the lead. So we had our first pure lead change on lap 19. Oh, by the way, the stages broke down like this. Stages 1 and 2 were 100 laps, and stage 2 was 167 laps. Kyle Busch had to start from the rear of the field due to an engine change, but is now up to 15th. So he was coming through the field in a hurry. Byron gets back by Keselowski for second. And when our first caution on lap 36, which was the competition caution, which is, standard procedure after rain, comes to the area, everyone obviously comes to pit road for tires because it's Darlington and the track surface is like a cheese grater, fresh tires were worth about 3 seconds more than old tires, if that gives you any idea. So you put on fresh tires and everybody around you is on old tires, you suddenly feel like Superman. And it doesn't really matter how ill handling the car is. You have fresh tires and, the other guys have old tires, they don't stand a chance, So there isn't going to be any 2-tire shit in this one. It's 4 tires all the way. Kurt Busch wins the race off pit road and he leads on the restart. Chase Elliott gets by Keselowski for 4th. Ryan Blaney drops back a bit on this run. Johnson gets by Keselowski for 5th. Johnson actually looked pretty good in this race. For a while anyway, until a certain event that we'll talk about in a minute. Caution number 2 on lap 68, Garrett Smithley in the 54 spins down the backstretch after getting loose off of turn 4 and gets a little bit of contact with David Reagan, although the contact with Reagan was after he had gotten loose. But he was able to drive away. And once again, everybody comes in for fresh rubber, and Chase Elliott wins the race off pit road this time. Elliott leads on the restart. Kurt Busch challenges on the restart but is unable to take advantage, but he continues to hound Elliott for the race lead and finally gets by him down the front stretch for our second pure lead change on lap 79. Johnson gets by Elliott for second, and then Larson gets by Elliott for third, and then Kurt Busch gets by for fourth, so Elliott starts dropping back to the field like a rock. Kurt Busch wins stage number 1, and Hamlin gets by Elliott for 5th at the line. So Johnson finishing second in this stage. That's 9 points. That's big for him because he's still trying to make it into the top 16. Of course, I don't think, anybody from 12th through 16th is going to be a contender for the championship anyway, because like I said before, this playoff format has created the false hope that, anybody at the bottom of the rankings is going to be a threat for the championship, which is a load of crap. I mean, if you're barely making it into the playoff, then you're not going to be a contender for the championship. But that's what this playoff format has done. It's created this false illusion for those teams that, squeak into the playoff. They should have never expanded it to 16 teams. 10 would have been fine. And then everybody would be like, well, how would you, do the eliminations from 10 down to 4? You knock 2 out every round. I mean, if we have to, have this garbage-ass playoff format, then just have the top 10, and you knock out 2 after every round. So you have the round of 10, and then the round of 8, and then the round of 6, and then the round of 4. The championship 4. There you go. Problem solved. And you won't have this, bullshit illusion that, everybody on the bottom half of the rankings is going to be a championship threat. I mean, let's be honest here. How many people outside of the top 10 since this playoff format was introduced has been a threat for the championship? No one. Anywho, Larson, everyone comes in for service. Kyle Larson wins the race off pit road. Larson looked really good tonight, but once again comes up short in his bid for a Southern 500 victory. He led 284 laps last year, but lost the lead on pit stops and ended up third, which I thought sucked ass because, he absolutely dominated the race last year and got robbed by Keselowski. Larson leads the start of stage number 2. Wasn't as dominant this year though. Kyle Busch gets by Johnson for third in turn 2. Then we have a great battle between Elliott, Logano, and Jones for 7th. Truex, Jones, and Elliott go 3 wide down the front stretch for 8th. That was pretty crazy. Kurt Busch starts challenging his teammate Larson for the race lead on lap 137, so both of the Ganassi cars looking good. Our third caution comes out on lap 140 when Ryan Newman spins in turn 2 after a possible nudge from Daniel Daniel Suarez. Sorry. I kind of realized there's two Daniels that we have to pay attention to, Hemrick and Suarez. And of course, those two are tied for the final spot in the playoffs. So now everybody, after this incident, everybody's thinking, oh my God, there's going to be a rivalry, for the final spot in the playoff. Nobody gives a shit, okay? It's for 16th place. And it's ridiculous. And Ryan Newman is like, what comes around goes around. Ryan Newman, shut up. You are in no position to be bitching, whining, and moaning after what you did at Bristol. So fuck off. I mean, I know some people probably aren't going to like that I said that to him, but you know what? I really don't fucking care. I don't want Newman making the playoff. After what he did at Bristol, fuck Newman. That's just how I feel about it. And if you don't like it, you can kiss my fucking ass. You don't control my emotions and you don't control my fucking opinion. And if you don't like that, eat a dick. That's all I got to say about that. Everyone comes in for service, obviously, and Kurt and Kyle win the race off pit road. So we have the Busch brothers on the front row on the restart. But then we get another caution on lap 158, or 4th of the day. The 32 of Corey LaJoie gets into the wall and gets a flat right rear tire and spins out on the apron in turns 1 and 2. So once again, everybody comes in for service, even though it was only like 20 laps. Because again, Darlington's a cheese grater. And this time, Kyle Busch wins the race off pit road, so he leads on the restart. Clint Bowyer moves up to 2nd on the restart. Of course, another guy is right there on the bubble. Then Logano with a flat right rear tire, resulting in an emergency pit stop. And that pretty much took him out of contention for the rest of the race. And this is a pretty big deal because he's trying to, continue to challenge, Kyle Busch for the regular season title, which comes with it 15 playoff points, which is pretty big. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Truex also has to make an emergency stop, but his problem was a loose wheel, so tough break for him. Kurt Busch gets by Bowyer for 2nd in turns 3 and 4, and then we have a battle for 3rd between Bowyer, Johnson, Hamlin, Jones, and Kyle Larson. You could throw all of these cars under a blanket. Larson nearly loses it off of turn 2, but hangs on. Hamlin gets up to 3rd by both Johnson and Bowyer, and then Jones does the same move on him. And then Larson gets by him as well, so both Bowyer and Johnson both lose 3 points, which is not exactly what they want because they're still trying to fight to get into the playoff. And then the 5th caution comes out on lap 197 when BJ McLeod gets put into the wall by Matt Tifft. And Kyle Busch will win stage number 2 under caution. Everyone comes in for service, and Kyle Busch wins the race off pit road. So now we get to the 3rd and final stage where Kyle Busch leads at the start. We have a battle for 2nd between Eric Jones and Denny Hamlin. So basically, 3 of the 4 Joe Gibbs cars, right up there at 1, 2, 3. Alex Bowman gets by Johnson for 5th. And this portion of the race got pretty damn boring. I mean, it basically started becoming like a conveyor belt. Not much going on, and it's just like, yeah, this is when I started to fall asleep a little bit. Not good. And to be fair to the race, I mean, it had been pretty damn good up to this point. I mean, well, I wouldn't say pretty damn good, but it was enjoyable. But yeah, the beginning of stage 3 was pretty bad. It really was. Then Keselowski misses pit road, so he has to go around a second time to kick off green flag pit stops on lap 250. Kyle Busch pits from the lead on lap 259. He cycles back with the lead, but has Jones right on his rear bumper. Newman gets a tire rub after contact with Daniel Hemrick. Johnson gets by Byron for 5th, but this leads to our 6th and final caution of the day on lap 274, and it would be the biggest one, and it would have the biggest implications. Hemrick loses his tire, gets into Denny Hamlin, and collects Michael McDowell. Jimmy Johnson is involved in this, William Byron, and Kurt Busch. So a lot of good cars are involved in this wreck and take a lot of damage. And Hamlin, he was off the pace for the rest of the race. Kurt Busch, he was never a factor again. William Byron was never a factor again. Jimmy Johnson, couldn't even get into the top 15 after that. So huge playoff implications here. So everyone comes in for service. Kyle Larson wins the race off pit road, so he leads on the restart. But then we get this great battle between him and Eric Jones here on the first couple laps after the restart. Jones has a great run going into turn 1 and gets the lead. But then coming off of 2, Larson gets a big run and does the crossover on him down the backstretch and goes by him to regain the lead in turn 3. But then coming off of turn 4, Jones gets back underneath him, does a crossover of his own, and regains the lead once again going into turn 1. So we get our 3rd and final pure lead change on lap 283. And this is when Eric Jones really showed that he can race with the best of them. Because at this point, from lap 283 onward, he's able to hold off not only Kyle Larson, but also Kyle Busch for the race lead from this point to the end of the race. I mean, that's pretty freaking impressive, all things considered. Larson continues to challenge Jones for the lead. As Jones and Larson battle hard for the lead, Kyle Busch is slowly closing the gap. And basically, all 3 of these guys just pull away from the rest of the field. I mean, by the time the white flag comes out for the end of this race, the gap between 3rd and 4th is 19 seconds. Yeah. Larson tries to do a slide job in turn 3, but can't quite complete the pass. David Reagan spins getting onto pit road, but he gets it back going again. The race stays green. Truex kicks off the final round of green flag stops on lap 320. Jones pits from the lead on lap 323. Kyle Busch and Kyle Larson follow him in. Kyle Busch beats Larson off of pit road to take over the 2nd position. Johnson is the last one to pit, which cycles Jones back to the race lead. And then Kyle Busch starts putting pressure on him this time. So, like I said, the first part of this run, Jones had to hold Kyle Larson at bay. And then the second half of this run, all the way to the checkered flag, he had to hold Kyle Busch at bay. Kyle Busch begins putting pressure on him for the race lead. Larson starts closing back in on the both of them with 33 to go. And like I said, the top 3 are within a second of each other. 4th on down is more than 10 seconds back. So, all 3 of these guys, they basically said bye-bye to the rest of the field. Alex Bowman scrapes the wall and ends up cutting down a tire, which forces him to an emergency stop. Larson starts challenging Kyle Busch for 2nd in the closing laps. Busch gets to within a half a second with 7 laps to go. Jones just barely scrapes the wall in turn 4, but no harm, no foul there. And then Kyle Busch smacks the wall off turn 2 with 3 laps to go, which basically gave Jones the opening that he needed. This eventually resulted in Kyle Busch getting a tire cut down, but he decided to keep it on the track instead of going to pit road. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why would he do that if his tire was going down? 2 reasons. Number 1, he lost the tire with 2 laps to go, basically down the backstretch, so about a lap and a half left to go. And it wouldn't make sense for him to go down pit road, because then he would lose a lot of track position, a lot of positions. And don't forget, with Logano having troubles in this race, Kyle Busch had a chance to lock up the regular season title, which he did, and that's 15 playoff points. Secondly, he was still able to finish 3rd, so he only lost 1 position to Kyle Larson when he lost that tire, because like I said, by the time the white flag flew, the gap between 3rd and 4th was 19 seconds. So he was able to get back to the line and finish 3rd, despite the fact that he had lost a tire. which was smart because those points allowed him to lock up the regular season title. In the meantime, though, Eric Jones does a great job holding both Kyles at bay and wins the Bojangles Southern 500 for his second career win. That Jones boy finally got the job done, and honestly, he's had some good runs this year. And earlier this year, he's had some great runs. He's just had some terrible luck. But needless to say, he's been hearing, the fact that Christopher Bell, he's waiting in the wings, and considering the fact that all three of his other teammates, had 4 wins apiece, he needed to try to step things up a little bit. And by God, he did it. And at one of the toughest tracks that you can do it at, at Darlington, and wins the Southern 500, a pretty big crown jewel. So now he's won at Daytona and he's won at Darlington. So, hell of a job by Eric Jones in that 20 car this week. And even though, he was already going to be locked into the playoff based on points, the win just kind of solidifies that. And it's like, okay, now he's got some momentum. Let's see what he can do with it. So, let's take a look at the race results for the Bojangles Southern 500. Alright, so your top 10 finishers. Jones, of course, with the win. Kyle Larson coming home in second. Kyle Busch, despite the flat tire at the end, came home third. Kevin Harvick in the 4th position. Didn't really talk about him a whole lot the entire race. Actually had alternator issues, but still was able to bring the car home in 4th. Brad Keselowski in 5th. Clint Boyer in the 6th position. Of course, he's one of the bubble guys. Kurt Busch, despite being involved in that accident, came back to finish 7th. Matt DiBenedetto with another top 10 run in that 95 car. Again, at one of the toughest tracks on the schedule. How about Paul Menard quietly in the 9th position for the Wood Brothers? And then Austin Dillon sneaks in and gets a top 10 finish. Not bad. Honorable mention goes to Chris Buescher, another guy driving for kind of a lower tier team, and he brings it home in 12th position. Not bad at all by those guys. So good job by Matt DiBenedetto, Paul Menard, and Chris Buescher. Couple of middle to lower tier teams, and they get some pretty good results. So pretty good job. So let's take a look at the point standings with one race to go before the playoff begins. Alright, so you should be seeing the playoff standings as you see them right now on your screen. Basically 14 drivers have locked themselves into the playoff with one race to go, which means there are 2 spots that have yet to be decided. So the drivers who have locked themselves in: Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex with 4 wins apiece, Brad Keselowski with 3 wins, Joey Logano, Kevin Harvick, and Chase Elliott with 2 wins, Kurt Busch, Alex Bowman, and Eric Jones with 1 win apiece. And then drivers who are locked in based on their points: Kyle Larson, Ryan Blaney, William Byron, and Eric Almirola. So those 14 drivers are locked in on points. And then there are the drivers that are on the outside looking in. 2 spots remaining. Clint Boyer holds the 15th spot, but is only 8 points above the cut line. And then, of course, we have the tie for 16th between Daniel Suarez and Ryan Newman. Jimmy Johnson, who has made every single chase since the original one was implemented in 2004, which is crazy to think about, because that's a decade and a half of making the playoffs. He's 18 points out, so he's going to need a miracle if he's going to keep that streak alive. Paul Menard is 19th, can't get in on points. He's going to have to get in with a win. Same with pretty much everybody else inside the top 30. So that is how the playoff standings look heading into the final race of the regular season at Indianapolis. Yay. Before we get to my final rating for the Southern 500, I actually have to give my final rating for the Grand Prix of Portland because I forgot to do that. So my final rating for the Grand Prix of Portland might as well give it back now. It's a 1.75 out of 10 for the Grand Prix of Portland. Like I said, it fucking sucked ass. So that's all I got to say about that. As for the Southern 500, I mean, it was a solid race. I mean, there were some parts of it that were kind of boring as shit, especially the beginning of that third stage. That was god awful. But I mean, that chase where Eric Jones had to hold off both Kyles, in that final run, that was pretty damn impressive. And he was facing challenges from both of them for pretty much those entire final 80 laps, basically. First it was Kyle Larson, and then after the final round of pit stops, it was Kyle Busch that was challenging him. So very impressive by Eric Jones to pull that off. So my final rating for the Southern 500, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. It was actually a pretty good Southern 500 this year, I will admit. It was actually pretty enjoyable. And that's despite the fact that it had a very late start because of rain. But I can understand why they wanted to try to get it in that day, or that night, because of course, Hurricane Dorian, who, as I said earlier, is tearing the Carolinas a new asshole. So I can understand why they wanted to kind of get that done. But that's going to do it for today's edition of The Fuel. The IndyCar series is off until the 21st or 22nd. Can't quite remember what it was. I think it's the 21st. For the championship finale at WeatherTech Raceway. Shit, if I can talk properly. WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca, which I was extremely excited about when it was announced last year. The return of the corkscrew, and we're finally going to see it again. And then for the Cup Series, I'm going to try to keep my optimism up for this next race because of this aero package, but I mean, Indianapolis and stock cars just are not a good mix at all. Again, we'll wait and see what happens, but I'm not optimistic about the Brickyard 400 being a good race. So I don't know. We'll see what happens, and we'll determine who the final two drivers to get into the playoff are. Although, to be honest, it's not really going to make a difference. They're not going to compete for the championship anyway, so it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But it's still going to be a talking point, unfortunately. So, but anywho, that's going to do it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully the next review, since it's only going to be one race for the next couple weeks, I should be able to get the fucking review up in a timely manner. So I apologize for that this week, but I've just been busy. But thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Till then, take it easy. Well, that is all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to rate, comment, favorite, like, and subscribe to my channels here on YouTube.com and over on BitChute.com. If you would like to sponsor my channel, go to my channel page at subscribestar.com. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, this is the PackerMan, signing out. Have a good one.